Hey, everybody. Holy cow, do we have a lot to talk about this week? I thought we were going to have a lot to talk about last week, but this week has been absolutely crazy in true crime. So I'm going to just sort of give you a little recap of the things we're going to talk about, and then we'll dive deeply into each one of them. First of all, there's the Young Thug trial. Young Thug trial is actually a RICO case, RICO racketeering case, which a lot of governments are using to shut down gang activities, and used it quite successfully to take down organized crime. So in that case, that is a RICO case. And the lead attorney for Young Thug, and who is sort of leading the defense in this case, was held in contempt, and the judge ordered him into jail. So we're going to talk in depth about that. Sarah Boone has filed a complaint with the court, a 57-page complaint with the court, about her eighth lawyer. And now the lawyer has filed a motion to withdraw from the case. Madeline Soto, there have been some developments in her case. The defendant in that case is Stephen Stearns. There are some developments in the TikTok defamation case having to do with the Kohlberger case, so we'll get into that. There have been some pretty serious developments in the Long Island serial killer Rex Heuermann case. Of course, we've had the Karen Reed case going on, and that thing is a major poop show. And a little bit of news on Murdoch. So before we get started, please hop out, smash the like button, subscribe if you are not already a subscriber, so you get alerts when we go live, and particularly if we do surprise live, which we occasionally do. And I have a few other sort of housekeeping announcements to make before we dive into the substance of our cases. So those of you who might be new to the channel, my name is Lori Hellis. I'm a retired criminal defense attorney, did both prosecution and defense, and I retired 5 years ago. And I have been writing a book about the Lori Vallow case. So I wanted to share with you, the book is complete. The final manuscript has gone to Pegasus Books, my publisher. And my publisher just sent me the jacket cover. So I thought I'd share that with all of you. Now we have a little over 100 people who are in our book launch group, our book launch league, who are going to receive a digital copy of the book. And we're asking them to read it in advance so that they can post reviews once the book is released. So that's the big news going on. Y'all know I went to CrimeCon weekend before last, and it was super fun. And now I'm back and ready to dig in. So my publisher has recently wrapped up having other people read the book and give me endorsements and what we call blurbs in the industry. And so that happened, and they were able to complete the book jacket. So there's been a couple other things that we've been doing. One is that we've been making a quilt for Kay and Larry Woodcock. It is a memory quilt for them. And one of the things that in Japanese culture, I'm going to get a grip here in a minute. In Japanese culture, it is common for people to fold paper cranes in memory of someone who has died. And so I decided that we would do a folded crane pattern quilt square. So those are paper pieced. Please do them with a black background. Any color for the folded crane is perfect. And they need to finish to a 6-inch square. And as the pattern is downloadable, you can get it off my Google Drive with a link that's in our show notes. That downloadable pattern is scaled to 6 inches. So if you just print that pattern, it should be exactly the right size, should finish to a 6-inch square. You're not limited to just making one. If you enjoy it, make more than one. The intention is, as soon as I am moved, which is going to happen in early to mid-July, and can get my sewing and quilting stuff out again, we will finish piecing it. So you've got a little bit of time yet if you want to get your squares in to me. The address is my P.O. box, which you'll find in the show notes as well. I think that's about all the housekeeping we need to do for now. I do want to say that I gave the bulk of the Justice for JJ and Tylee bracelets out at CrimeCon. I have a handful left. So if you still want one, you can drop me a self-addressed stamped envelope, but we're really to the end of that at this point. So thanks everybody for joining us. Looks like we have 100 people in chat so far. Welcome. And I want to get started because we have a lot to talk about. So let's talk first about Young Thug. Now, Young Thug is a case that's been going on for quite some time now. It has been going on for the better part of 18 months with 88 trial days so far. So it is a case where there have been some allegations of murders, but that is not the primary focus of the case. The primary focus of the case is to hold people accountable on these organized crime, and it's been described as an organized crime organization around a rap record label. So the case has been going on for such a long time. So what happened on Friday, is that the prosecution is still putting on their case. And the prosecution called a witness whose last name is Copeland. And he's been a member of and been involved in all of these organized criminal activities for quite some time, been to federal prison, been to state prison. He's sort of a frequent flyer. And the prosecution granted him immunity for his testimony. But he didn't also get federal immunity. So he said he was holding out to get federal immunity along with his state immunity agreement. And so he got on the stand. There's sort of varying reports of whether he actually said ahead of getting on to the stand that he intended to invoke his Fifth Amendment right. But the rule is that if you have a client who is going to invoke their Fifth Amendment right against self-incrimination, you don't want to do that on the stand or in front of the jury, because it could compromise the jury. The jury, certainly a jury is going to assume that if a person is taking the Fifth, it's because they're guilty. Sorry, allergies are in full swing. And it's been very nice here in Idaho. You can see I'm in a tank top, and I'm going to show everybody my new ink. This is my book with flowers coming out of it and a butterfly. So that was exciting. I did that about 3 weeks ago, I think. I promised myself a butterfly for every book I publish. So I already have one. I never turn the right direction here. I already have one here, and now I have the second one. But I digress. So Mr. Copeland got on the stand, and the prosecutor asked him, how old are you? And he said, I'm grown. And she said, what is your age in years? And he said, I'm taking the fifth. And so immediately everything stopped. They got the jury out of the room, and the judge then said to the witness, sir, you have immunity. You can't take the fifth because you already have immunity. And the guy said, I'm taking the fifth. And so he and the judge sort of had a little set to, and the judge said, well, that's fine. If you're not going to testify, then I'm going to hold you in contempt and I'm going to put you in jail. So he was in jail all weekend. Monday morning rolls around, and and court is supposed to start at 8:30, and by 11 o'clock, court hasn't started yet. So finally the judge comes out, starts court. He gets on the witness stand, and he starts to answer questions from the prosecution. So then Brian Steele, who is Young Thug's lead attorney, gets up and says, hang on, I've received information that you met in an ex parte hearing with the court reporter present, and the prosecution and this witness who's already been sworn in. And that is not appropriate. You cannot meet ex parte with a witness. And I also understand that during that conversation, you, judge, told him that you could hold him in contempt and you could hold him in jail somewhat indefinitely, because you could hold him as long as the trial is going on and he's refusing to testify. And that could mean that you could hold him until all 27 of the co-defendants their cases have been disposed of. And that is, that's witness intimidation. And so he accused the judge of inappropriately meeting ex parte with a witness and with witness intimidation. He also claimed that he had been told that during that ex parte meeting, the defendant had confessed that he had committed a murder that's involved in all these RICO charges. And the judge, instead of answering the question about why the defense was not invited into that meeting, which they absolutely should have been. There are very few instances where it's okay to have ex parte contact with only one side. Ex parte means only the prosecution is there or only the defense is there, but it is absolutely against the rules and forbidden to have contact with a judge without the other side being there. And there are some very narrow exceptions to that. And this was not one of them. And so Brian Steele said, I'd like to know why we weren't invited to that meeting. And since you had the court reporter there and it was recorded, I want a transcript of that. And the judge, instead of dealing with that issue, when Brian Steele called him out, the first thing he said was, "How did you find out about the meeting? Who told you?" And the defense attorney said, "I'm not going to answer that question. The question is, why would the court be holding a meeting behind the back of the defense?" And Brian Steele kept pressing that issue, that he wanted to know why they were holding a meeting without the defense present. And the judge wouldn't answer him. He just kept saying, "I'm going to give you 5 minutes to tell me who told you." So they agreed to disagree. And the judge then said, "I'm holding you in contempt. I'm ordering you to serve 20 days in jail. And so that you can still attend trial during the week, I'm going to order that you serve those days on weekends." So he ordered him to serve 10 successive weekends of in jail. Really avoiding the issue that an ex parte meeting, it is with a witness, is reversible error, and the whole case could get thrown out. So Brian Steele's wife is his law partner. She immediately filed a notice with the appellate court that she was asking for a supersedeas bond, it's called. It's a little bit different than what we think of as a bond in a criminal case. What it means is that the appeals court is immediately going to take it up, and in the meantime, the sentence is being stayed. So she asked for that. The state of Georgia has a strike force, if you will, a team of defense attorneys that stand by to represent their colleagues in these kind of situations. And so the attorney who came to represent Mr. Steele is the head of the Criminal Lawyers Association, and she's a very experienced criminal lawyer, and she showed up to represent him. Then yesterday, they filed the actual motion for a supersedeas bond with the appellate court, and the appellate court actually granted it this afternoon. So what that means is the imposition of the jail sentence is now stayed. He's already served 2 days this weekend. I had to give him credit. He asked if he could be housed with his clients so they could continue to prepare for trial. But the bottom line is that the judge had absolutely no business having an ex parte meeting with the prosecution and a witness. It very likely is reversible error. And I think every lawyer who represents one of the 27 co-defendants has already moved for a mistrial. And I would say that I'm always harping on the fact that mistrials are difficult to get, that mistrials occur when there's some sort of misconduct or some sort of something comes out that cannot be cured with a curative instruction, and the jury's already been sworn. That is when you get a mistrial. So these attorneys are reasonably asking for a mistrial in this case. So we'll see what happens, but the Georgia Supreme Court has it up on appeal. And in the meantime, Brian Steele, who is the lead attorney for Young Thug, will be back in court. One of the other attorneys filed a motion for the judge to recuse himself, and he promptly denied that motion. But I think that the handwriting may be on the wall. The biggest concern is this case has been going on for 18 months. And 88 trial days. A jury's been seated all this time, and it is possible that if a mistrial is granted, it is possible that they would have to start this all over again. And that's, I don't think, a prospect that anyone likes the idea of. But this judge really overstepped his bounds, and he should have never had an ex parte meeting with a witness and the prosecutor to begin with, and then to double down on putting the attorney in jail for calling him on it. It's just, and this judge is the chief judge for that county, that jurisdiction. So that one is going to be really interesting to watch. There's going to be a lot of developments coming along on that one. So let's talk now about Sarah Boone. So she sent the court a 57-page letter complaining about her lawyer. So the judge set a hearing, and they had a hearing. And at the hearing, Sarah said, I don't necessarily want to fire her, but you need to tell her to be nicer to me. Now, this woman is highly experienced, 40 years in practicing criminal law. And she has spent 20 hours with Sarah Boone going over all of the evidence. And, the attorney basically said, I'm not sure she can get along with anyone. And when you are a lawyer and you are asking a court to relieve you of your responsibility to your client, it's very tricky because you cannot disclose to the court any client confidences. So you really have to go to the court and say, Judge, you're going to have to believe me that I can no longer represent this person. So here's the problem. The problem is that Sarah Boone has in her mind what she believes will be a successful defense. Now, we don't know for sure. I'm speculating, but reading between the lines, we know that one of her original attorneys hired an expert to explore the possibility of a battered woman syndrome defense. And so we don't know what the outcome of that was, and it's likely we're not going to know the outcome of it because it wasn't favorable. So Sarah Boone has in her mind that she has a particular way that she wants her attorney to do things. She wants her attorney to present a defense that is likely not defensible. It's not a defense that could win the day. Moreover, it's very likely a defense that isn't true. This is where the big problem comes in, because a lawyer has a responsibility of truthfulness to the tribunal. And what that means is a lawyer cannot knowingly allow their client to get on the stand and perjure themselves. They cannot knowingly allow their client to lie under oath. And I think that's where Sarah Boone is going. And I think that every one of her lawyers has said, I cannot put on that defense because it's not true. And so this eighth lawyer finds herself in the position of having to tell a judge, we have irreconcilable conflict because I cannot follow the directives of my client. So the lawyer, after that hearing, the judge said, I will read your 57-page submission and I will make a decision. In the meantime, the lawyer the next day filed a motion to withdraw and be relieved of the assignment. So I think that's what's going on. One of the interesting things that happened in the hearing was the prosecution and the defense were both asked, how much time do you think this trial is going to take? And each of them agreed 5 days. 5 days for a murder trial. I mean, that's pretty unheard of. But interestingly enough, both the prosecution and the defense agreed. So in Sarah Boone's case, she admitted that she zipped her boyfriend into a suitcase. She says it was accidental. They were kind of playing a game and she forgot he was in there or something along that line. She fell asleep. When she woke up, she didn't realize he hadn't let himself out of the suitcase. And so when she opened it up, he was dead. However, I'm going to share my screen here. Now, I want to caution you, this is hard to watch, and it is also, there's some language in it. But this is
Sarah.
Stupid.
Sarah.
That's my name. Don't wear it up.
Sarah. I can't fucking breathe, babe.
Ew.
Sarah.
Stupid.
So there we have Sarah Boone completely refuting everything that she has said, which is that it was an accident and that she didn't realize when she went to sleep that he was still in the bag. Very clearly, we have her knowing he was in the suitcase, taunting him. That action goes on. That's just a short snippet of a much longer video that she took on her phone of her taunting him and him saying, "I can't breathe, let me out," and her continuing to taunt him and to make fun of him and not to let him out. So that's going to be some pretty hard evidence to surmount, which may very well be why both sides say it's not going to take more than 5 days to try this case, even with jury selection, because it's a pretty cut and dried case. And speaking of cut and dried, we're going to talk at length about the Karen Reed trial. But first of all, there are developments in a couple of cases that before we dive deep into Long Island serial killer and Karen Reed, I thought I might bring you up to date on. So the first one is Madeline Soto is the victim. Stephen Stearns is the defendant. He was her mother's boyfriend. This is another one that needs to bear a trigger warning. He was mom's boyfriend. They were kind of on and off again. When the police seized his phone, they found evidence, pictures and videos of him committing SA on Madeline since she was 8 years old. So it's a heinous, awful case. He was arrested. He was charged with first-degree murder. Florida announced this week that they will seek the death penalty for him. One other development, well, a couple of other developments. There's been a development in the Murdaugh case. You may remember that Dick Harpootlian was one of Alec Murdaugh's lawyers. He has been a elected to the state Senate in South Carolina for the past 6 years. And yesterday he was defeated in the primary. So it was pretty interesting. I saw a couple of Twitter posts saying it's possible that Dick Harpootlian could actually be Murdaugh's final victim. So I think that the public has spoken about what they felt about Harpootlian and Griffin and their support of somebody like Alec Murdaugh. And maybe, just maybe, the tide is turning on the Good Old Boy Network down there. The other thing is the TikTok defamation case. Now, this case is related to Brian Kohberger, who is accused of murdering 4 college students in Moscow, Idaho. Before Kohberger was arrested, there was a period of time while he was under investigation, but they hadn't identified a suspect. During that time, a TikTok influencer who claimed to be a psychic said that she knew that a particular college professor, who she named by name from the history department at University of Idaho, was responsible for the murders, and that she had found a hitman to murder them because she had been having a romantic relationship with one of the young women, and she didn't want that to come out. She was a student, and when the professor's attorney sent her a cease and desist letter, she continued to double down and persist with accusing this woman of having been responsible for the murders and for having a same-sex romantic relationship with a student. Both are things which are incredibly damaging to this professor's reputation. So after having told her to knock it off and sent a cease and desist letter, she then filed suit against the TikToker. The TikToker at one point, now Emily D. Baker has covered this in depth. So if you're interested in it, check Emily's playlist, because she's got a playlist sort of going through all the pleadings and going really in depth on this. But so what happened was the plaintiff in that case filed suit against her. This is a civil case for defamation. And the TikToker just kept saying, no, it's true. Truth is an absolute defense to defamation. And I know it's true. And I know it's true because of my spiritual gifts. And I was given that information by my spirit guides. And there is absolutely nothing that would support a factual conclusion that it was true. So this week, the court granted a motion for summary judgment. Now, y'all may not have heard of summary judgment, because it's a civil remedy. It doesn't happen in criminal cases. So in a criminal case, such as we saw in Daybell, and we've seen in many other cases, the prosecution puts their case on, and then the defense makes a motion for a directed verdict, acquittal before they ever put their case on. Meaning, and they what it means is, judge, the prosecution didn't put on enough evidence that you could find that a conviction was warranted. And in that case, the judge has to take all of the evidence in the light most favorable to the prosecution, meaning that whatever the prosecution put on, the judge has to say, okay, even if I believe that all of that is true, is there enough evidence to support a conviction? It's a very high standard to meet. It's difficult to get. It happens every once in a while, but not frequently. So a motion for summary judgment is sort of the civil alternative of that. What it says is, Judge, even if you believe everything in the petition, there is not sufficient evidence, or there is sufficient evidence as a matter of law to support a finding on behalf of the plaintiff. So what the plaintiff said is, we believe that as a matter of law, if you find that we have to get into libel and defamation per se and a lot of other things, but under the defamation statute, if you are not a public figure and someone makes a defaming statement against you and it isn't true and they publish it, all things that are clear in the pleadings, then the judge can order that you are liable for that defamation, even without having to prove anything further. So the judge found that there was no proof that the allegations were true. It was very clear that she published them over and over on her TikTok channel. And so the judge ordered summary judgment. The judge granted summary judgment on the face of the petition, on the pleadings, meaning that they found for the petition on the pleadings. They didn't even have to put any evidence on. So the next thing the judge said, in Idaho, you can't plead punitive damages in your initial petition. I don't know why that is, but you can only plead it after you have pled your case, and you can amend your petition to include punitive damages. So the judge gave the plaintiff leave to amend their petition to include punitive damages. And that's a big deal. Now, this woman is representing herself. She probably doesn't have a pot or a window, so she's very likely judgment proof. And this professor is never going to get anything out of her, except possibly force her into bankruptcy. So I'll keep you up to date as I hear things that are going on in that case. But in this social media milieu, it is so important that creators are not putting information out into the Ethernet that isn't true and you can't stand behind it. It's not corroborated. This is an outrageous case. This is someone saying my spirit guides and my ESP and my ability to talk to the afterlife has told me that these things are true. But I think we all need to be cautious about making sure that we are factual in what we bring to the table. So, and now I want to move on to Rex Heuermann and the Long Island serial killer. Now, I want to caution you all, if you are at all squeamish, find these subjects difficult, please, I will not hold it against you if you click the X and catch up on the feed later, skip it, whatever you want to do, because this information is really horrendous. But we're talking about a serial killer, so we need to talk about it. So this week, Rex Heuermann was charged with 2 additional murders: the murder of Sandra Castilla and the murder of Jessica Taylor. This investigation is ongoing and will be ongoing for probably years. If y'all are thinking that Rex Heuermann's going to get to trial anytime soon, I wouldn't bank on it. So here's what in the press conference that the DA held announcing the 2 new charges. So now he's up to 6 murders. In announcing that, he explained that some of this information was developed out of the electronic files that they're having to go through. But I want you to, he listed the number of devices that they are going through. 27 computers, 46 phones. Now, these are all smart devices, so they're all internet. 27 computers, 46 phones, 17 tablets, 58 internal hard drives, 9 routers, 44 SD cards, 15 cameras, 4 GPS devices, 42 USB devices, 11 music devices like iPods or MP3 players, 647 discs, CDs or floppy disks, and 22 external hard drives. That's a lot. That is, if 9 terabytes will fill the Library of Congress, this is warehouses and warehouses if this was printed on paper. And they're painstakingly combing through this information. As a result of that painstaking information, they discovered a document on his computer. And I'm not going to put it up. It's out there. If you want an in-depth look at the documents and the pleadings, Gisela from Grizzly True Crime has it on and has read through the entire document. But there's so much in there that is so awful that if you're curious, you can go and read it. I mean, it essentially is a to-do list and a roadmap and a plan for his serial killing. They allege that he kidnapped Jessica Taylor and that he held her for 5 days as a prisoner and then murdered her. He then decapitated her and cut off her hands and feet so that it would be more difficult to identify her. He obliterated tattoos and other identifying marks. And so Jessica Taylor was found in one location and her feet, hands, and head in another location. Both of these were identified by DNA that was lifted from hairs that were on the victims, and both matched, either matched Rex Heuermann or someone he lived with. We know that in one case, one of the victims, the hair matched his wife Asa. In this case, we know that one of the hairs matched a woman he had previously lived with. There's been speculation it was his first wife who divorced him because he was a creep. There's so much investigation to be done. This is just the tip of the iceberg. But this document that they found, which had been deleted and they were able to recover out of a deleted file, is incredibly damning. I mean, it is unbelievable. And it actually relates back to one of the victims, to Jessica Taylor. we saw last week they went into his house and went in with a new search warrant and came out carrying stuff. And one of the things that this document lists is he would hang drop cloths. For any of you who've ever seen Dexter, that was his MO. He also, Rex Heuermann also was a reader of Mindhunter, which is the book published by John Douglas. And John Douglas has published several books about serial killers, but the Mindhunter is about FBI profiling. It's very clear that he was using it not as a cautionary tale or not as a how to figure out whether you're a serial killer or not. He was using it as a how to be a better serial killer guide. He was using this planning document to do things like remind himself to pay cash for his gas and not to charge his gas, to making a list of supplies he was going to need, making a list of things to do to avoid being identified. It's really chilling. And they also said that they found torture porn on his computers, and that many of his victims bore resemblances to a lot. The scenes bore a lot of resemblance to what he was consuming online. So it was one of the things that they seized in his house was he had made himself a note that tape didn't keep up his drop cloths and he needed to use push pins. So they went back into the house checking the paneling to find whether or not there were push pin holes in the wall, and there were. So just further confirmation that at least for some of these victims, he committed those crimes in the home. And it appears that every time his wife, Asa, and their daughter and her son were out of town was when he would have his, what he called playtime. So it's very, very troubling. And the first thing I thought was, oh my goodness, what has his lawyer got to say? Because if you remember, his lawyer was very vocal saying Rex Heuermann is asserting his innocence. He is innocent. He didn't commit these crimes. We're going to prove that he we're going to prove that he's innocent. And but you got to wonder what that lawyer is saying now with this incredibly damning document. I mean, it basically sews up Rex Heuermann as the guy. So his lawyer has got to be sitting down with him and saying, you're screwed because of this. And like I say, I think that's just the tip of the iceberg. I think that there are going to be many, many more victims identified. There are still more victims in the Gilgo Beach area, and we have no idea where there might be other victims as well. I think this is one of these cases, sort of like Ted Bundy and like the Green River Killer, that we're never going to know for certain that we've identified all the victims. Rex Heuermann had family that lived down in the Carolinas, South Carolina, I think. And he also had a timeshare in Las Vegas. So who knows? He certainly had ample opportunity. Being an architect, he seemed to have enough money to support these habits and be able to travel and send his wife on trips and those sort of things. There was an interesting thing that came out late today, and I'm going to tell you about it, although I'm reading it off my phone. I'm not really sure what's going to happen, but y'all might want to keep your ears open for it. This was released on a couple of Twitter accounts, including Joe Jackalone, who is a retired New York homicide investigator and has been very interested and deeply involved in this case. Not involved as a creator. He has a podcast, and it's been one that he's been following closely. So here is what this announcement says. John Ray is the attorney for Shannon Gilbert's family, and I believe he may also be representing the other family, some of the other victims' families as well, but certainly representing the family of Shannon Gilbert. If you've been following this, you may have seen him talking about the victimology after the first indictments came down. So here's what this announcement says. The title says, Rex Heuermann was not leading a double life. New important evidence uncovered as to Rex Heuermann's family. Then it says, surprising new important evidence regarding the family members of Rex Heuermann now has been uncovered, according to John Ray, Miller Place, New York attorney for Shannon Gilbert's family and for other victims of Rex Heuermann. John Ray will release the evidence to the press at a press conference on Thursday, June 13th, at 11:15 at John Ray's office, and then it gives the address in Suffolk County, New York. It says attendance is limited to members of the press and to law enforcement authorities. So this is juicy. He is the one who released the information that potentially Rex Heuermann was meeting these sex workers because he and his wife were involved in the swinging lifestyle. So, which leads me to believe that he may very well have some really interesting information to impart to us about how Rex Heuermann was meeting his victims and whether or not other members of his family were equally involved. So I don't know what he's going to announce, but you all now have the same information that I do. So now let's talk about Karen Reed. What a goat rope. That's a nice way to put it. So the defense, Karen Reed's defense attorneys from the very beginning have said there was some sort of cover-up within the Canton, Massachusetts Police Department. Now, for those of you who are not familiar with the case, Karen Reed has been accused of both second-degree murder and negligent homicide for the murder of her boyfriend, John O'Keefe. John O'Keefe was a Boston police officer, by all accounts, a stand-up guy, a guy who, when his sister and brother-in-law both died, took over as guardians of their children, and was raising a sister and brother as his own. And by all accounts, Karen Reed was also very involved with those children. So it is late January in Massachusetts. The weather is terrible. John O'Keefe meets a group of friends, including an ATF agent who worked out of the Canton police station, head office there, Boston police officers, and Canton cops. In the process, they meet at a bar, they have drinks, they close the place down sometime around midnight, and one of the police officers says, "Hey, everybody come over to my house for after party." So Karen Reed and John O'Keefe have both been drinking a great deal, and Karen Reed drives John O'Keefe over to the party, but then says, "I don't want to go in," and drops him off. She contends that she dropped him off and he went in the house. The people in the house say John O'Keefe never came in the house. Now, there was some beef, potential beef, let's put it that way, among some of these folks. Brian Higgins, who is the ATF agent, had been exchanging flirty texts with Karen Reed. We don't know whether John O'Keefe discovered that or not, but it is possible that he discovered that Higgins was hitting on his girl, and that there could have been a confrontation over that. Additionally, one of the young men who was at the house that night, was a young adult, had kind of had beef with John O'Keefe over cutting through his yard, and all indications are John O'Keefe was kind of an OCD guy. He liked things neat. He didn't want you walking through his yard that he kept impeccably groomed, and so he and this young man had some beef over the kid cutting through his yard. So the contention is that John O'Keefe went in the house. There was some sort of a confrontation for an unknown reason, and they beat him up and threw him out in the yard, and he died of exposure. There is so much conflicting evidence, and I'll tell you what, you don't want to be on Twitter right now, because the Twitter wars are going on big time. There's the Free Karen Reed group. There's the Karen Reed is guilty group. There's a guy who goes by the name Turtle Boy, who has a podcast, claims to be an investigative journalist, who has been utterly convinced that Karen Reed is not guilty. And he now has been charged with witness intimidation for his demonstrations outside the courthouse and some of the contact he's had with witnesses. And it is just crazy. So where we are at this point is the prosecution, after we're into week 4, I think, the prosecution is still putting on their case. Because of all of this contention that there is some sort of cover-up, or at a minimum, there is incredibly shoddy police work. The police investigation is horrible. At best, there is a shoddy police investigation. At worst, there's a cover-up. So the prosecution has been putting on their case, but because of all of this advanced talk about a cover-up, the prosecution has had to play defense. So they have been putting on all of these witnesses, the people who were in the house, the people who were the police that came and did the investigation. None of it so far really gets to the crux of how John O'Keefe died, because John O'Keefe died with a laceration on the back of his head and a skull fracture, a laceration over his eyebrow and one on his nose, and a set of scratches, abrasions that are in linear lines down one arm. Now, the people who owned the house had a police dog, a German Shepherd, probably a dog that had washed out of a police dog program. And that dog was known not to be super friendly to visitors and strangers. And so the defense contends that those marks on John O'Keefe's arms are from the dog, and that somehow the dog got involved in this melee, which would make sense if this dog is a police dog washout. So the prosecution has been putting on their case very painstakingly and playing a lot of defense. And one of the biggest issues is the lead agent on the case. So at some point, Canton is a suburb of Boston, and a lot of people live in Canton, grow up in Canton, stay in Canton. And so it's got a very small town feel, and everybody knows everybody. And a lot of these people who were on the police force went to high school together. So Karen Reed is not from Canton. She is an outsider, and she was John O'Keefe's girlfriend. So the police, they're all very tight-knit group. It doesn't take very long before either the sheriff or the police chief at Canton PD says, you all have too many connections to John O'Keefe. You know, there are too many of you were out drinking with him. You're all friends. Everybody knows everybody. And so the Canton Police Department is going to recuse themselves from the investigation. And we're going to bring in, and it can't be Boston PD because he was a Boston police officer. So we're going to bring in the state police. So the state police come in to do this investigation. And the detective who is in charge is a trooper named Michael Proctor. And Michael Proctor is why defense lawyers hate cops. I have to be straight up with you. He is a horrible human being. He is a guy who abuses his power. He is misogynistic. He is the kind of guy who still has a text thread with all his high school football buddies. I mean, he's not a nice guy. Well, he becomes under federal investigation. So the defense says, we have a medical examiner's report that says that the medical examiner cannot determine a cause of death. We have a police department who's decided that Karen Reed backed over this guy or backed into him and killed him. That she did it on purpose, and then she drove off and left him to die in the snow. That's their theory. So, but there's so much conflicting evidence. There's no evidence that O'Keefe and Karen Reed were in a fight. There's no evidence that, I mean, they fought like a normal couple, but there wasn't any evidence that the relationship was imminently breaking down, although that's what the prosecution wants to say. So the defense attorneys say, we have this conflicting medical report. We believe, and we have all of this questionable investigation. And before the whole thing is over, the feds get involved. And there's a federal grand jury, and there's a federal investigation. And Trooper Proctor is under federal investigation right now for his poor performance, the botched investigation, as well as some just horrendous text messages that he is exchanging, texting people about the facts of the case and about Karen Reed, and calling her names and saying terrible things about her, and really making it very clear that 16 hours into the investigation, he had already decided Karen Reed was guilty, and he was collecting evidence to implicate Karen Reed. He was not investigating any other theory other than the fact that Karen Reed was responsible for John O'Keefe's death. So, as a result of this federal investigation, the feds seized all the phones. They got everybody's phones. And so they got Trooper Proctor's private cell phone and discovered all of this awful and very damning text messages against him, that he was talking to people who were involved in the investigation. His sister is best friends with the woman who owns the house that John O'Keefe was at the party at. I mean, it's very incestuous and very convoluted. So the defense all along has said Karen Reed did not do this. And the injuries on John O'Keefe's body are not consistent with being hit by a car. But here we are 4 weeks into this trial, and we've yet to hear from the medical examiner or any accident reconstructionists. We haven't heard from the expert who's going to present the information from the black box in the car. We haven't heard any of that. All we've heard is this like sparring back and forth. So initially, the defense was really able to cast some serious concerns on the investigation, and there was talk about that the prosecution was not even going to call Trooper Proctor, even though he's the lead investigator on the case. But the defense made it clear that if the prosecution didn't call him, they were going to call him. So in an effort to do damage control, the last 2 days, Trooper Proctor has been on the stand, and he has been demolished. Now, there are a bunch of other things going on. The prosecution presented a video, and in the video, it's a video, they seized Karen Reed's vehicle, and they towed it to the Canton Police Department, even though Canton was supposed to be recused. And even though the state police had locations that were closer by to take the vehicle, Proctor insisted that it had to go to Canton PD. So they took the car to Canton PD. Canton PD has a 2-bay, it doubles as a sally port, meaning that it's secured. You can pull a vehicle in and put an offender, a defendant in a car, and then open up the sally port and pull out, similar to what they do in the courthouse and in jails. So they use it as a sally port, but they also use it as a mechanic's bay for the vehicles. So they show video. It is motion activated video of the tow truck driver getting in Karen Reed's car and backing it into the Sally Port, into the bay. So, and they've shown this video over and over again, and they say, now, when you see this, you can see that no one was around that taillight, because there's these allegations that her taillight was tampered with and that the police scattered pieces of her taillight at the crime scene to make it look like she had hit John O'Keefe. So they're making this real point that nobody was around that taillight in all of this video. And then they put up crime scene tape and they tape off the car. But what the defense shows when they get up is that video is actually inverted. And so what appears to be the passenger side of the car and appears to be the taillight that would have hit John O'Keefe, it actually is mirror imaged, reversed. And what we were seeing was actually the driver's side of the car. And the taillight that would have hit John O'Keefe is furthest away from the camera and clearly shows people around that end of the car and near that. And they're obscured on the video, they're obscured by the car. So you can't really see what they're doing, but they're clearly back there on that side near that taillight. So that was the first piece of evidence. They also pointed out that there's missing ring camera footage. And today they showed notes from one of Trooper Proctor's team that he had viewed video footage off the ring camera and made a note about what time it was and what had happened. And it was in a sticky note in the file. And lo and behold, that piece of ring camera, which would be when Karen Reed came home from dropping John O'Keefe off, isn't there. It's missing. And the person who had the access to John O'Keefe's ring camera account was Trooper Proctor. So there's a lot of problems with the investigation and a lot of questions about the investigation. And we're not even into the defense's case yet. They're just cross-examining. We haven't even gotten to them presenting their case in chief. Now, her lawyers are two of the best lawyers I've seen in a long time. And they have done a masterful job at cross-examining all of these witnesses and preparing and being right on top of their exhibits. And I mean, they have done, if you want to see a masterful cross-examination, take a look at Trooper Proctor's, the examination of Trooper Proctor over the last 2 days in the Karen Reed trial, because he's done really an amazing job. And I think that on many occasions, the prosecutor has looked sketchy. The prosecutor has looked like he's trying to hide things and like he is trying to muddy the water. And I think that's a really dangerous place for a prosecutor to go, because I think you've heard this over and over from me and from how many other lawyers. Credibility is so key. We saw that in Daybell. You know, we had concerns about whether or not John Pryor's sort of abrasive demeanor was going to come across as arrogant, or and that the jury was going to take that into account when they were considering the their decision. Now, there is always a jury instruction that says, no matter what the lawyers do, no matter what the lawyers say, what they do and say is not evidence. Closing arguments, opening statements, anything they may say is not evidence. What is evidence are the things that I tell you are evidence, people's testimony and documents and those sorts of things. And they are cautioned, you don't consider the demeanor of the attorneys or the way that they cross-examine people or what they say, because it's not evidence. So there's always that caution. But credibility is so critical. If you get up in front of a jury and they seem to think that you are not giving them the full answer, or you are not credible, or you are hedging, or that your testimony is going to get discounted. And we've seen that with several of the law enforcement officers in the Reed trial that have been cagey and sketchy and parsing their words and acting evasive. And I think when you do that, the jury just discounts everything you say. I mean, this guy's acting evasive because he's got something to hide. And when that spills over into the prosecution, then you have some serious damage being done to the case. I don't know whether Karen Reed backed into John O'Keefe. I don't know. No one knows for certain whether or not Karen Reed was responsible for John O'Keefe's injuries. Now, there's a lot of things that sort of point in a different direction. I mean, you would think if you ran a $6,000 or a 6,000-pound car into somebody, they would have some bruises. They would have some injuries to their lower body where the bumper hit them. And the only thing John O'Keefe has are scratches on one arm and an injury in the back of his head. A couple of abrasions on the front of his face. It looks a whole heck of a lot more like somebody hit him in the back of the head with something heavy or a baseball bat or something like that, rather than that Karen Reed hit him with her car. So when you look evasive and cagey, you give the jury reason to doubt your credibility, then you lose your ability to get the jury to have an open mind about what you're presenting to them. And that is really, really important. Now, I will say that these lawyers, all three of them, Karen's lawyers, and there's several prosecutors, but the main prosecutor, are all doing a pretty good job. Their demeanor is very professional but engaging. But I have some serious concerns about the way the prosecution's presenting their case, because I think it makes them look evasive and cagey and like they have something to hide. So based on what I know now, and let's remember, we're not even through the prosecution's case in chief. We have not seen the defense information. We have not heard from the medical examiner. We have not heard from accident reconstructionists or from the potential of the data from her Lexus. So we haven't heard any of that. We have to reserve judgment as to what the state still hasn't presented. But looking at what we have now and the credibility, the absolutely abysmal investigation, I mean, John O'Keefe is lying in the snow. They go get a leaf blower to blow the snow away so that they can look for evidence. They they go back time and time again and find more of these shards of this supposed shattered taillight. And there's drops of blood in the snow. So the police go out and they get red Solo cups, which are not sterile. Lord knows who's handled them and whose DNA is on them. And they put this melting snow in these red Solo cups, and then they don't have an evidence bag. So they get a brown paper bag from the local grocery store, the Stop and Shop, and they put all of these red Solo cups in that bag. There are photographs of this bag sitting open in the Sallyport Bay next to Karen Reed's car while they're examining her car. I mean, the investigation it's like the Keystone Cops. It's absurd. And if half of what they say happened, the defense says happened, I don't see how she gets convicted. I just don't. I have not seen anything that would lead me to believe that there's a motive. They haven't established any kind of a motive for why Karen Reed might have, according to them, put her car in reverse, gunned it, and mowed him down at 26 miles an hour in a blizzard on a side street in front of somebody's house. So I haven't seen it. Now, do I know for certain that Karen Reed didn't commit this crime? No, I don't. But I think there is a very good chance that she is going to be acquitted. As the case stands right now. Now, I could change my opinion as the case continues to develop, because there's a lot more case to come yet. But I have real misgivings about whether or not the state can prove their case. And when you pile on top of that Trooper Proctor's incredible misconduct, his awful boorish text messages, the fact that he was telling people 16 hours after John O'Keefe was found that she was going to go to prison, that she was the one. I think he's committed some serious misconduct. I will be very surprised if once he is done on this case, he is still a state trooper. I think he is on his way out and very likely will be fired in very short order. I find it really troublesome that it was one of his supervisors that he was sending these really awful text messages about Karen Reed to, and his direct supervisor was liking his text. So it goes deeper than just one bad apple. There appears to be some pretty widespread negligence at best, corruption at worst, in the Canton Police Department, and very likely spilling over into the Boston Police Department as well. I don't think it's any secret that the Boston Police Department has had corruption issues for years. That's going to creep into any large law enforcement organization. However, how you deal with it is what proves your reliability and your trustworthiness. And the Boston Police Department hasn't been well known for dealing with rogue officers very willingly. So I think it's a serious problem. And I think that there is a pretty good chance that she's gonna get off. So we have about half an hour to take questions. So if you have questions, please post them in the comments. I do want to remind you that if you happen to be one of those people who's shy and likes to lurk in the comments, you are welcome to post your questions in the comments. And because I read them all, I do my best to go through the chat and the questions after we have a live. I don't always get through all of them, but I try. And if you have a question and you're frustrated that it's not getting picked up in the chat, please post it down below. If even that feels a little exposed to you, you are always welcome to email me. My email is in the show notes as well. So feel free to use any of those avenues to get in touch with me. I am on Instagram and on Twitter, so you can find me there as well. So let's take some questions, Jen. And by the way, thank you, Jen. Hi, Teresa. Do you think the jury is buying any of the state's case to this point? You know, I think it's really hard to tell. I think the jury probably at this point has more questions than they have answers. I think at this point they're saying, wow, there are some things here that don't add up. You know, I think that juries really sort of, I don't know, put things sort of on a kind of like the old multiplication table grid, you know? I mean, it's like, if this and this, it adds up to this. And I don't think that they have been able to do that in this case yet. And that's concerning. Certainly, I know that we're not done yet. We're not anywhere near done with the prosecution's case. So I know that there's much more to come, but I am concerned that at this point, the defense has been able to do much more than just poke holes. You know, I mean, we talk about the Daybell case, and in essence, what John Pryor was doing was poking reasonable doubt holes in the testimony. What the defense has been doing goes so far beyond that. The defense has really been able to point out that there are some serious deficiencies in the investigation in this case that raise reasonable doubt to a level that she could get acquitted. So do I think the jury's buying the case? I think they have many, many questions that they have not been able to answer yet. And some of that, they're going to go into deliberation with some unresolved questions. But I don't think at this point, they are to the point of saying, nah, she's not guilty. The state has biffed it. I think that's because the state has the burden, and the state comes in with some sort of kind of some built-in credibility. So I don't know that the defense has done enough to completely undermine that sort of built-in credibility, but I think they're getting close. And if the defense can put on as much information as they claim to have, I think that I think there's a good chance they could get an acquittal. I want to remind everybody, please put capital Q's or question marks, like Teresa did in your question. It just makes it easier for Jen to spot them and mark them with a star to come back to. So please do that. And next, hi, Polly-Yo. There is such a small town type buddy group. It will be shocking if he was fired. He will get a warning and time off maybe, but he will be back as a cop. Even his boss will not get fired. You know, I don't know about that. His boss was on the stand before they broke this afternoon. And it was kind of clear that he was a straight arrow, that he had already dressed Proctor down for the text messages and some of the stuff he'd said. And I don't know. It's a small town. I will tell you, it is a small town. But Proctor is a state police trooper. So he works for the state police. He does not work for the Canton Police Department. I think that's the difference. I think if it were possible, I think the Canton Police Department likely would sort of gloss over. But I'm not sure. And with it being as public as it has been, I cannot imagine the number of people in Massachusetts who are dropping a dime on their state senator saying, what the heck is going on here? So I would be very surprised if Proctor were able to skate past this. It's pretty bad. I'm sure that most of you probably have listened to a lot of it. But if you haven't, it's worth going back and listening to. But he says some really horrible, demeaning things about Karen Reed that are incredibly inappropriate, makes comments about her medical conditions. I mean, he really, about her physical appearance, I mean, he really goes way beyond the bounds of what's acceptable. So, oh, Jane Blackbird, do we know how many women are on the jury? I understand there are 10 women on the jury. Now, we do not know what the makeup is because there are some alternates. So we don't know, we won't know what the final makeup of the jury is, but it appears to be more women than men, which I think doesn't bode well for Officer Proctor or the prosecution. Good question. You know, jury composition is always important. Nicky Mick, Brian Walsh's attorney is to file a motion regarding questionable conduct, specifically naming Proctor et al. Walsh is accused of murdering his wife and Proctor is the lead. Yes, I'd heard about that. It is a different murder case. It doesn't have anything to do with John O'Keefe, but Proctor is the lead on that one as well. And I had heard that his attorney was filing motions to maybe have his case thrown out. So here's the problem. When you have a dirty or at a minimum shoddy investigation, then you have a problem with every case that officer has touched. My home state in Oregon, we had an incident where we had someone who was working for the state crime lab. Now, they weren't a law enforcement officer, they were a crime lab technician. But that person was doing shoddy work, but was also falsifying documents and also potentially scooping a little bit of the drugs off the top when she was testing the drugs. And as a result, there were probably 50 cases statewide that got thrown out because she had done the lab investigation. And they were cases where the findings were incurably tainted, and those cases just had to be thrown out. So it happens, and it does happen when you have a dirty cop, one who's hiding evidence and willing to stretch the truth for one reason or another. I'm getting kind of scratchy. Hello, I don't recall. Sounds, there was the homeowner, Brian McCabe, was on the stand in the Reed trial, and I think he probably broke the record for I don't remember, I don't recall. Question, early in the trial, I think it was said that the defense team was very good and that the judge was handling the courtroom or trial well. Do you think these statements are still true at this point? Yeah, I do. Now, one of the things that I find bothersome is that the judge said that she didn't want any objections of other than the word objection. Now, in general, when a lawyer makes an objection, they at least say a word that tells the judge what the basis of the objection is. Objection hearsay, objection relevance, objection argumentative, objection speculative, objection facts not in evidence. Those sorts of ways to tell the judge what you're basing your objection on. This judge has said, I don't want to hear any of those. So we don't know, and the lawyers don't know, when an objection is made, what the basis of the objection is. But she has done a good job of sort of telegraphing maybe the reason why. So objection sustained, and then she'll say, Mr. Lally asked that question a different way, or ask a different question, or so she has, as the trial has gone along, I think she has come to that point of giving them a little hint as to why she's sustaining an objection so that they can respond and properly frame their question. But it's maddening from the outside because we don't really know. And what is happening is, if there is an objection that requires some other discussion, it's all being done at sidebar. Okay, so it makes it a little bit harder to assess whether this judge is fairly calling balls and strikes, because we're not really sure what the basis of those objections are. Now, some of them are pretty obvious, leading or, those sorts of things. But, when you get into objections such as raising issues on cross that didn't come in on direct, well, that's an issue that the judge is having to have a sidebar on, because she's not taking those kind of objections from counsel table. So, but in general, I think she is doing a good job. I think early on it felt a bit like she was a little biased towards the prosecution, but I think as time has gone on and she has sort of seen what the defense is positing, I think that she is having less and less patience with things like no chain of custody on items going into evidence. So I think she's less and less patient with it, and less likely to defer to the prosecution. So. Hi, Kathy Johnson. Do you think Proctor and his whole group of officers will face any charges? He obviously tainted this case and lied under oath. Why does he still have a job? Well, I think that's an excellent question. I'm pretty sure he is not going to have a job. He may not even have a job next week. On the issue of charges, I think that if the defense clearly shows that he obstructed the investigation, that he there could be charges for obstruction. And I think that if they can show that he lied under oath, there could be perjury charges as well. The question is whether or not the prosecution, because remember, it's the prosecution that makes these charging decisions. If the defense had their way, I guarantee you there'd be charges. But the question is whether or not the prosecution has the stomach for it. And once again, we're talking about a small town. Everybody knows everybody. the DA's a good old boy. So I don't know. I don't know whether they would actually bring charges against the state trooper. But I think he's done being a state trooper. Hi, Tennessee girl, 79. When TP, Trooper Proctor, first took the stand, he carried an unsealed evidence bag. I've watched many trials and never saw a witness carry evidence or evidence presented that wasn't sealed. Is it as crazy as I think? Yeah. They brought out on Cross today that there were days when there's no chain of custody, that all of that stuff that was brought in as evidence didn't get logged into the system and didn't end up in the evidence room for weeks. And so there's so many opportunities to tamper with it. Now, as far as the unsealed evidence bag goes, I haven't watched every day of the trial because I was still watching the Valadabel trial. But it is possible that that bag was opened by another witness. Now, I seem to recall that the woman who was on the stand who was talking about reconstructing the tail light, and she had all the pieces and was trying to figure out how they all fit together. It seems to me she opened some of those bags and handled some of those pieces. So it's possible that that evidence bag was unsealed during trial. So what happens is that evidence bag then is in the custody of the court clerk, and the court clerk secures those. But it's possible they could be left unsealed, untaped, because of that. So I don't recall specifically. There were several bags of evidence. Then there were several different groups of those taillight pieces. So I don't remember specifically, but there's no question that the chain of custody was non-existent. And certainly the chain of custody, as to there wasn't a log of who logged in and logged out of the evidence room. There wasn't any ability for anybody to know who'd been in there, who'd handled those evidence bags. It was very, at a minimum, sloppy, and maybe intentionally so. Rachel Gamber. How are you, Rachel? When you have a case as awful to prosecute as Karen Reed's case, what can you even do? Do you hire another investigator and start all over, or what? Well, here's one of the problems. One of the problems is that some evidence is perishable, right? So you'd never get a second chance to go collect that evidence. So you can hire another investigator, but that investigator is going to be investigating the last investigator. So, for example, they did not. Now we've heard all about these laser systems. We heard about it in Daybell, where they literally can map every piece of evidence with a laser system. And we've heard about those kind of things. Think about this. If law enforcement had waited until all the snow melted and gone out and mapped where all of those supposed pieces of her taillight were, and specifically mapped them, don't you think that would have been helpful for the accident reconstructionist? Wouldn't the accident reconstructionist be able to say, okay, if in order for her car to be the method that John O'Keefe died from, these pieces of her taillight would have to be here, and instead they're here. So an accident reconstructionist is looking at physics and looking at the physics of how things collide and how things explode and how things move, and would have been much better able if that was all charted on a map of where these things were, where they were in relation to each other, where they were in relation to John O'Keefe and the car and all those things. But they didn't do any of that. And in fact, they went over the site with a snowblower. So by the time they were recovering these little tiny pieces of plastic, who knows where they came from? Who knows if they were even related? And in fact, the person who rebuilt the taillight assembly found a lot of pieces that were unrelated to Karen Reed's car and completely unrelated to the case. So from the get, this was a very botched investigation. And it is really hard to go back and undo that. So what do you do as a prosecutor when you have that kind of case? The person who makes a decision what crime is going to be charged and whether a crime is going to be charged is the prosecutor. So the prosecutor had complete control over that. The prosecutor could have said to law enforcement, look, you guys messed this investigation up so bad that I can't prosecute this case. And I'm sorry, I feel terrible that a Boston police officer died and we don't know how. But I can't prosecute a case with this kind of sloppy, botched investigation and this terrible investigation. But the elected prosecutor made the decision that the case was going to be prosecuted because it was a cop, and Lally was just the guy it rolled downhill to, the prosecutor who's having to go make the case. I will say that he is not a smoking gun litigator. I mean, he is not a hot litigator, and I think he trips over his own stuff pretty often. But he's not doing a horrible job with what he's got to work with. The decision that the case was going to go forward was entirely on the elected prosecutor. So I hope the people of Canton consider that when they're going to the polls. Citizens need to vote and to express their opinions at the ballot box. Hi, Tiff Knox. Ellen Greenberg case, anyone. Once the scene was gone, that was it. You cannot fix it. I cannot dredge up the Ellen Greenberg case. So if you have some details, that would be helpful. But it's that way with every case. Evidence is perishable. If you don't take care of evidence and you don't obsessively document everything, then when the case comes to trial years later, people don't remember. I mean, even in the best investigation, memories fade. That's why we insist, and why law enforcement best practices are to document whenever possible. Take pictures, take laser locations, do all that stuff, so that when we do get to trial, we have this 1,000-piece puzzle where all the pieces fit. Because right now we have gaping holes. That's reasonable doubt. I think we've talked before about circumstantial evidence and reasonable doubt. If you're putting together a 1,000-piece puzzle and the puzzle has something to do with a farm, and you get this little piece off here in the corner and you look at it and you say, there's a piece missing, and I don't know whether that brown blob is a cow or a dog or a tree. That's reasonable doubt. If, on the other hand, you look at that brown blob and you say, oh, I can see the cow's legs and I can see the cow's tail, and the only thing really missing is the cow's face, and oh, look, here, I have a piece that has the cow's face on it. That one fits. That's not reasonable doubt. That's circumstantial evidence. But when you have a case where you're looking at a blob and saying, I don't know what that is, that's reasonable doubt. And I think that's what you have in this case. Too many missing pieces of the puzzle. I think it's impossible at this point to say whether those missing puzzle pieces are intentional or whether it's just sloppy work. Don't know yet. Hi, Bo Peep. On the Soto case, what do you think the likelihood of charges being brought against Jen Soto, or what they might be allegedly? So they just released, and once again, Gisela from Grizzly True Crime does a great job of doing these deep dives into documents. She loves her documents. So they just released within the last day or so something like 800 pages of a big data dump. And I think we're going to see that at best she was a very negligent parent. And I think there could be some child endangerment charges coming because of that. I think that she was one of those women who didn't want to lose her man, and so didn't ask too many questions. And yeah, it's an awful case. And I hope that little Madeline is going to receive justice. And I hope that if her mother was complicit in any way, that she's held responsible too. And I suspect that's going to happen. Gerber Daisy. Oh, back to the Vallow case. Lori Vallow is asserting her speedy trial rights, like in Idaho. Is her Arizona trial going to have to happen next month? This is a really good question, and the answer is I don't know. So here's what happened. They had a pretrial conference at a case management conference a week or so ago. And Lori Vallow waived her appearance, so she wasn't there. And the defense attorney actually asked that she that it not be televised, but the judge denied that. So what has happened is she has not waived her speedy trial right and has told her attorney she has no intention of waiving. So apparently one or both of the lawyers on her case are new. She just got a new lawyer in April. So the guy said to the court, I have 100,000 pages of discovery and I've been through 8,000. And I that's what I can tell you. He didn't say, I don't know if I can be ready or any of those things. He just gave the judge that information and said, I'm going as fast as I can. But he's only been on the case since April. So the judge said they're going to have another scheduling meeting in July. He wants Lori there, and he wants to address it then. Her trial is set to start August 8th. The latest it could start is the 1st of September. So the judge could bump it back to the latest date it could start, which is, I think it's like the 9th of September. So the judge could bump it back that far. But I don't have any, I don't have any suspicions that she's going to waive. I think from day one, she was told never waive, because you've got to put the prosecution to the test and hold their feet to the fire and make them put their case on, and don't give them extra time to prepare. It also means that her attorney doesn't get time to prepare. So, I mean, it swings both ways. So I don't know what's going to happen because the court hasn't decided yet. But I suspect we will know something. I mean, I know we'll know something after that conference in July. I want to say it's around the 16th, maybe. I might just have my studio up by then. Miss Peaches, in Daybell, trial judge denied objections, saying it was untimely. I'd never heard that before. What say you? It does happen, and I agree. What he was saying was, the way that you object is you say objection, and then you stop the answer. Okay. Ideally, the way it should happen is prosecution asks a question, and before the witness can answer, defense attorney jumps up and says objection, and the basis for the objection, it's leading or relevance or whatever, and the judge makes a ruling. But what happens sometimes, because there's so much going on in a trial, is the prosecution asks the question, the person answers it, and then the defense attorney says objection. Well, there may be some limited reasons why you would ask a judge to move to strike an answer, because because that person volunteered information that you didn't expect, or some other reason to strike that. But typically what happens is, if you make your objection after the question's already been answered, the judge is going to say your objection wasn't timely, meaning you didn't object before the answer. So I noticed that Judge Boyce did that several times. He also did it in Lori's trial. But it's difficult when you are, it was easier in Lori's case because there were two lawyers, and one could sort of keep track of. Now, the rule is that the lawyer who's doing the cross-examination does the objections, but you can be totally focused on that. You don't have to focus on whether or not you're getting your exhibits ready, or whether or not you've got them handy, or all those things, because you've got somebody else sitting at the table who's feeding you that stuff. And John Pryor didn't have that. So there were times when he realized that he should have objected to a question, and it didn't get in until after the answer. I remember there was at least one instance where Lindsay Blake objected, and the judge said too late. So the rules of evidence are very prescribed. My dog is barking, and they go really fast. And I'm going to tell you, it takes a career to really feel like you have a grasp of the rules of evidence. You're always going to miss something. Trials moving really fast, and things come in ways that you didn't expect, or they come in a sequence you didn't expect. And so, I mean, evidence is without a doubt the hardest part of practicing law. And I'm going to tell you that there are lawyers who refuse to do trial work because they're intimidated by the rules of evidence. So it is a lifelong learning process for lawyers to understand the rules of evidence. Good questions tonight, guys. Hi, Carla. Question: is it possible that Sarah Boone suffers from brain damage related to severe alcoholism? And if so, how does that factor into a mental health defense? Good question. So let's take a look at that from a couple of different angles. In a criminal case, you cannot plead, you cannot assert that you were unable to form the mental state, you weren't able to understand right from wrong, that you weren't able to formulate the mental state because you were drunk or under the influence of intoxicants that you voluntarily consumed. So the first part of that is she cannot claim, I'm not responsible for leaving him in the suitcase because I was drunk and I passed out. That's not a defense. But if she has damaged her brain by severe alcoholism, and I actually have had a case like this where I was able to put forth an argument that my client was not competent and likely would never be competent to stand trial because of the extensive damage to their brain done by chronic late-stage alcoholism. And that person actually died while they were committed. But that is a possibility. I don't know at this point, because we haven't seen any evidence, mental health evidence, but she's pretty with it when she's in court, and she's pretty able to read the law and write her letters and those sorts of things. Sorry, I just wanted to make sure I got a text message. I wanted to make sure it wasn't something related to our stream. So I don't see there being a competency issue with Sarah Boone. I think that she knows who does what in a trial. She knows what's going on. Do I, on the other hand, think that she has a serious mental health issue and that she is, for whatever reason, unable to conform her thinking to be able to understand what her lawyers are saying? I don't know. I mean, what I'll say is I've had many clients like Sarah Boone, and what Sarah Boone's problem is that she believes that anybody who is not telling her what she wants to hear or doing what she wants them to do is against her, lying to her, not on her side, unkind. You know, because a lawyer's job is not to tell a client what they want to hear. A lawyer's job is to lay out all of the options and all of the alternatives and explain the law and the consequences to their client. I mean, this woman lawyer who's been practicing for 40 years, she's certainly, as I would have, going to sit down with her client and say, we're going to have the come to Jesus meeting. I'm going to lay this all out for you, and I'm going to tell you what's your best case, what's your worst case, what I think you can expect, and I'm going to explain to you why I think that's the case. What is it about the evidence that tells me that you don't have a good chance of bringing this defense, or you don't have this, or you don't have that, or you can't bring in that stuff? So, I mean, I do not think that there is a competency issue for her. And I don't think that there's a defense to what she did, because I think she was competent when she made the choice. It's very clear that from the video that I showed you that she knew exactly what she was doing. She knew that he was in there. She knew he was saying, I can't get out and I can't breathe. and she was taunting him. So it's very clear she knew what she was doing. This isn't a case where she was convinced that she was locking an evil demon in the suitcase to protect the world, something like that. It wasn't an alien that was going to detonate a dirty bomb. It was her partner who was zipped in a suitcase. So she knew it was him. She knew what she was doing. And the problem with that is her lawyer has the responsibility to sit down with her and tell her the truth. This evidence is very damning. Let's figure out how we save your life, how you don't get the death penalty. This is the same conversation Lori's lawyers had to have with her. And the same problem arises where the defendant says, that's not the outcome I want. I don't want to, I don't want you to make that argument, and I don't want that outcome. And you say, well, here's the problem. You can choose A or B. Those are the two options. You want C, and C is not available. And that is always a lawyer's dilemma, is trying to compassionately but honestly explain to your client what their predicament is and what the best possible outcome is. And I know y'all have heard me say it before, because I said it when I told the story about my sweet friend Nancy, who was involved in an armed robbery as the getaway driver. They had her on video while two guys held up at gunpoint a convenience store. And she said, I can't go to prison. And I just laughed at her and said, honey, I'm a good lawyer, but I'm not that good. I don't have a magic wand. I'll do my very best for you. And instead of 8 years, she got out in less than 3. She got a college degree. She started a business. And now she has a nonprofit organization that helps people place people in jobs when they come out of prison. But I remember, and I am absolutely certain that that Sarah Boone's most recent lawyer said the same thing. Honey, I'm good, but I'm not that good. And I can't make up a defense where one doesn't exist. And that's the big problem, is that Sarah Boone's lawyer cannot suborn perjury or in any way misrepresent to the court the facts. Let's take one last question, since it's almost 10 after. And Rachel Gamber. If Chad actually wants the death penalty, I personally suspect he does. Can he waive his upcoming automatic appeals? No. Automatic appeals are just that. They are not waivable. Now, beyond that appeal, so what happens is that appeal goes directly to the Supreme Court, so bypasses the intermediate appellate level court, goes directly to the Supreme Court. Even at that, it's going to be at least a couple years before the court decides that. If the court upholds his conviction, which I suspect they will, then he will go through the whole series of, they'll do federal habeas, they'll do all those things. He could waive all of the next crop of appeals, but he can't waive the initial direct appeal. And that is because the death penalty, the state of Idaho, most states, require that a higher court review to make sure that he received due process in that process, and that it is not inappropriate to have imposed the death penalty. So he can't waive that initial appeal, but anything beyond that he could. I'm not convinced that Chad Daybell wants to die. I'm not convinced. I think Lori is more likely to say, I'm ready, than Chad, because I think Chad is essentially a coward. And I don't think that Chad, I don't think Chad is as eager to get to the celestial kingdom as Lori is. Hi, Jill. So I got that today too. And here's what is going on. When Chad's trial ended, I still had some work to do, and that required them to wait for me to get the manuscript back to them. And my publisher did their best. I did my best to try and get that to the typesetter, because that's where it had to go, to be typeset, and then go to the printer. And unfortunately, it was late getting in the queue to be printed. So the publisher has now slipped the date until September 23rd. And that's just because of their printing schedule. So nothing else changes. The audiobook should release at the same time the book does, on the 23rd. We've picked a narrator who I hope you'll all be really happy with, a woman. And I'm very excited. The publisher was very excited for the response for the rights to publish the audiobook. And audiobooks are becoming more and more popular all the time. I love audiobooks. Somebody I saw in the chat said they listen to audiobooks while they cross stitch. Well, I always listen to audiobooks while I quilt. So, and I'm really looking forward to doing some recreational reading. The last 2 years, I've done nothing but reading for the book. So I'm very excited to be able to do a little recreational reading. Is there a cutoff date for the cranes to be mailed? No, not at this point. I can tell you right now that I am not going to get to putting the quilt top together probably until August at the earliest. So there's still plenty of time. One other person said, and I thought this was a brilliant idea, if you're not a quilter, but you fold origami cranes, they had the brilliant idea of sending the folded cranes to me, and when we send the quilt, we'll pack them. We'll pack the quilt in folded cranes. I thought that was a brilliant, sweet idea. So if you happen to be one of those people who can fold cranes, you can do your part too. So I think that's going to wrap it up for tonight. I'm really glad we had the opportunity to get together and visit on Wednesday night. It's never lost on me that you could be doing lots of other things or watching lots of other online content. So thank you for joining us. Thank you for your support. I appreciate it. Thank you for all of those who dropped by the booth at CrimeCon and told me they'd pre-ordered the book. Thanks for everybody who's given the book a little boost and a little shot in the arm. There are some exciting things coming up as we start the publicity for the book, that not anything I can talk about right now, but stay tuned, because there's going to be a lot of fun things coming down the pike. And I will tell those folks that are part of the Book Launch League that that should be coming out, I would say, in the next couple of weeks. You should be getting your digital PDF of the book, and then that will be available for you to read. And we're going to be doing some smaller group kinds of things with the Book Launch League. We're going to do some online stuff. We're going to do some fun things. I have book plates to sign for anybody that reads and posts a review. And so I'm excited that we're going to be able to, with that group, do a few things that you won't get to do otherwise. So I'm going to say goodnight. Thank you so much, Jen, for always being a great moderator. Thanks so much for everybody joining me. And I will see you next Wednesday. And if next Wednesday is anything like this week, we'll We'll have a lot to talk about once again. Good night.